So your next 3 assignments in this class are going to be over 3 of the most useful and common genres in photography, and those are portraiture, establishing shots / landscapes, and details. And we'll start with portraiture. So what makes a good portrait? You might not be surprised to know that the 3 fundamentals that we've learned in this class, light, composition, and moment, are also foundational to making great portraits. So let's start by talking about light. And portrait photographers often really take advantage of light, and it's really important to them. They have studio strobes, they have whole lighting setups in their studios or even outside their studios to be able to take advantage of the best light possible for the person they're photographing. Now, we're not using that for this class. We're just using available light, and in most cases that's going to be sunlight. But window light can be a great resource too, because windows kind of naturally filter and diffuse light in really flattering ways that can look really nice for your subjects. So just line up your subject next to a window. If half of their face is facing the window, they'll have a really strong contrast from one side of their face to the other. If their full face is facing the window, there'll just be that nice kind of light cascading all over their face. It'll look better than maybe just the lights that are inside your house, or maybe even better than direct sunlight, at the wrong time of day outside. Speaking of outdoor lighting, golden hour still applies with portrait photography. So those couple of hours around sunrise and sunset, they're also great times to make portraits. One thing to keep in mind though is you probably don't want the person you're taking a photo of looking directly at the sunlight, right? Because they're going to be squinting and it's not going to be natural for them. So you'll be getting some kind of natural contrast, because probably the best thing to do is to position the person that you're photographing so that they're at an angle from the sun. Let's talk about composition next. Composition is also really important for portrait photography. So in addition to the rules that we've already learned, things like rule of thirds and leading lines, there are a couple other compositional tips that we can go over. First, if you've got one of these lenses that I asked you to tape down, right, to tape down at 35 millimeters or around 35 millimeters, you've got my permission to take that off now. And actually it's better to zoom in a little bit to around the 50 millimeter focal length. And that applies to you who have retractable lenses that you can't tape. Now I'm giving you some permission to zoom in a little bit. Not too much, not a crazy amount, but just to zoom in a little bit. So 50 millimeters, or just zoomed in a little bit, maybe halfway to what your lens can zoom into, is a really good focal length for portraiture for a couple reasons. One, actually zooming in, having a narrower focal length, is part of how you get that nice background focus separation that a lot of times you want in portraiture. That's actually more effective for achieving that background separation than the aperture, right? We learned that opening up the aperture really wide can give you that background separation, and it does. But actually zooming in to like 50 millimeters, 70 millimeters, around there, can also give you that separation. That's actually why the newer iPhones have multiple lenses. Right? One lens is a super wide lens. It's great for landscapes and things like that, but it's not great for focus separation. But the portrait lens is the one that's zoomed in the most, and that focal length just works really well for focus separation. So just zoom in a little bit. Don't go crazy, but zoom in a little bit more than the way you were zoomed in for the previous few assignments. So the next composition tip is range. Make sure to photograph from a variety of distances. Make sure you photograph from far enough away that you're getting, a head-to-toe shot of the whole person. Make sure you're also getting kind of a waist-up type shot, head and shoulders range, even closer than that if you want, or even further away, where the person you're photographing only takes up a small part of the frame. Get as much variety as you can for these portraits. Another tip is layers and depth. Please don't line up your subject against a brick wall and just photograph them with some bricks behind them. Create some layers and depth in your composition so that there is a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. Think of it as if you're photographing through something. You're photographing through a bookcase, through some foliage, through some furniture, through a tree or something like that, to the person that's being photographed, and then there's more behind them that's giving that image some depth. That compositional tip that we learned earlier, frame within a frame, that's really important in portrait photography. Again, think of that space behind the subject's head like a picture frame. You want that space to be clean. You just don't want that background area behind their head especially to be obstructed and busy. So what about that third fundamental of photography, moment? I actually think moment is the most important fundamental when it comes to portraiture. So look, I could give you all kinds of tips about posing for portraiture. Where to put their hands, like what to do with their arms, what to put their weight against, that sort of thing. But I think that might distract you from what's really important here is developing organic, natural moments with the person that you're photographing, where their personality really starts to come into the photo. Look, these people are not statues, and your job is not to pose them like a statue and then have them stand still for 5 minutes while you get the right picture of them in that exact pose that you gave them. Portraiture is about a collaboration between the person that you're photographing and the person who is doing the photographing. So think of posing the person that you're photographing in just a really rough general sense. Ask them to sit down. Ask them to stand up. Maybe ask them to put their weight against something. Put their weight on one leg or not the other. But don't worry about giving them too much direction. You want them to adjust their body positioning and their body language naturally. This is only going to come with time. So the most important thing is for them to be comfortable. And those first 10 to 20 pictures that you take are really just for them to get comfortable hearing this all the time, this shutter click. It takes a long time to get comfortable with that sound, but once you are comfortable, you can start to sort of open up and to create some more organic, natural moments. But it's awkward at first, and that's okay. Talk to them, laugh, embrace that awkwardness together, and you'll get through it. I find that the hardest thing to overcome when you're being photographed is that silence. Because you can have like a really nice kind of banter with the photographer and be talking and laughing, but eventually, if you're being photographed, you have to be silent. Right? You have to stop talking so that you're not getting pictures of just like your mouth awkwardly open as you're mid-sentence. And you as the photographer have to eventually stop talking too. Eventually, the both of you have to be totally silent while you're just snapping pictures. So one thing that can help with that is just to play a little background music. Pull out your phone, pull up Spotify or whatever you listen to music with, play some songs that you like, stick the phone in your pocket, and go from there. It's really just something to like fill in that awkward silence so that neither of you feels the need to fill that silence with talking. Either way, as you're having this banter, this conversation with the person you're photographing, don't move too far away from your camera controls. When the moment presents itself, you want to be ready. You want to be ready to take that picture and not fiddling with the settings. So for this assignment, you have total control over the aperture, the ISO, and the shutter speed. You are shooting in manual mode for this. You can still use autofocus. You can still use auto white balance, which you've learned, but for the exposure, for whether it's dark or light, you're doing that all yourself, and that's ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. As usual, take no fewer than 50 photos, and I need you to turn in no more than 5. Often in this class, this is the student's favorite assignment. You might take a lot more than 50 photos, and that's a good thing. Again, the more photos you take, the better. So select the 5 photos that you want to turn in using Bridge. Open those photos in Photoshop, and then for this assignment, it's optional if you want to convert the photos to black and white or not. But I do want you to make some other adjustments that I'm going to go over in another video. Just some really basic adjustments to brightness and contrast that you can make to these images. Save those edited photos, either black and white or color, doesn't matter, to that submissions folder where you're saving all of your edited photos, and then submit those photos to Blackboard. In the end, I hope you have fun with this one. Good luck.